All right, so let's talk about what is going to be on the test that you're about to get. This one, I really do think that it's easier than the first one for a couple reasons. Number one, the material, I feel like we covered a little more directly the things that are on the test. There's several of the questions I know for sure that you should remember and should hit you pretty quick on this test. Also, instead of 7 chapters, this time it's 5. So that makes it easier. Also, 7 was a lot. You know, I really should have done 5, 6, 5 or something like that, but I'm still learning my way as I go. Like, again, something else that I've thought about as it being a learning process is that next time I teach 473, we will have this book and we're going to have the NCTRC study guide as another book for that. And that will be part of how we go through the test. And it will, for the ones of you who are not planning on sitting for the exam, it sure won't hurt you. It's the same information that we're talking about through all these classes. And since this is one of the higher level ones, we'll see where you stand on what you remember. For the ones who are getting ready to sit for the test, it is a very good book to have. So might as well just include it. I didn't do it in time this semester, and we were a little late in the game to worry about. I may try to get my hands on one by the end of the semester and come in here and do a little quizzing or something like that with you guys, depending on time frames. But long story short, that's just a change that I'm going to make in the future. So we covered chapters 1 through 7 on test 1. So we got to chapter 8, and it talks about financial management. And I don't have any, I'm not going to sit here and give you a whole bunch of real specifics. From the tests that I have put together, I don't have a lot of, I looked at ways to try to quiz you guys. Other than asking you the test questions, then it would be difficult to not give away exactly what's going to be on there. I know that would really upset y'all if we did that, but I'm not going to do that. So what I'm going to do is we're going to talk about, I'm going to look through these end of the chapter things that are available to y'all, and we'll talk over some of the ones that are there just as a refresher. The main ones that hit me as things that I want you to take from these chapters. Okay, what is active treatment? Somebody tell me that. What constitutes active treatment? In order for something to be billable, we're talking about financial side of things, they must see active treatment. So what is active treatment composed of?
The thing that I'm thinking about when I hear active treatment, I'm thinking actively engaging, putting forth energy directly into the treatment of a specific client. I don't think that's what you're looking for.
No, it's very close to what I'm looking for, actually. Number one, it needs to be in your client's IPP, their individualized program plan. You're addressing something in that IPP. You are also, it needs to have a reasonable expectation to improve the client's condition. So just remember that. Basically, you're working on something in the IPP that you, and what you're doing has a good chance of improving something that's in the IPP. Needs to be supervised. You don't have to list all these things down. And needs to be maintained in medical records. So if you don't keep records, you didn't do it. Basically, that's the way a lot of things are. And if you don't keep records, you damn sure can't bill for it. So something to think about there. That's a very important thing of why we write down everything we do. Let's see. We talked about different budgets, different budget formats during this chapter, and how as a manager, especially top line manager, if you get to that point, you'll have to come up with budgets for your department. And you've got, you know, line item budgets. Need to know what that's about, like the difference between line item, zero-based, program budget, performance budget, and a flexible or variable budget. And they're all listed in that chapter. Line item, zero-based, program, performance, and flexible. Those are the 5 different types of budgets. A line item budget, just to kind of run through, you are comparing in a line item budget what you know, each expenditure is going to be on a separate line, and you compare fiscal year 2019 2020 to fiscal year 2020 2021 projection. So on your list, whoever is looking at this and approving it or disapproving it sees that you are adding 7% for equipment. So you need to be able to justify what equipment you're doing, why you need it. But in order to make up for that, you are dropping, you know, you saw that what you budgeted for electricity last year was 10% more than what you spent. So you drop electricity by 7%, and you kind of tried to offset things as much as you can. What is a capital expense? Usually, yes. Usually it will return money. Capital expenditures are things that are big ticket purchases usually. When they're on your budget, it's capital expenses are things like putting in a pool, the OPC building the new activity center. That's a capital expenditure. That's big money going out for something that's going to yield in the process. So know about capital expenditures and what they are. We talked about, for some reason in this book, and I guess it's just the background of the authors, they talked a lot about US healthcare versus Canada healthcare. Basically because it tells you the difference between, you know, the sort of healthcare we have here and the sort of healthcare they have in Canada, which is more of a what type? Kind of a universal healthcare in Canada, and how that each one has kind of benefits and drawbacks, and it talked about that. So there'll probably be some questions regarding that. When healthcare, way back when, think about even before this stuff came into play, who paid for healthcare? The individuals. They were the first people, they just had to pay for their health care. If you didn't have it, you better have a buddy who has it or you don't get it, basically. It's not like it is today. So that's a difference. Do you guys remember any of the challenges we talked about with healthcare? Some reasons that things are changing. It's been a little while since this chapter, so I know it's kind of hard. What's that? Yes, technology changes are causing a stress financially on the facilities because, number one, they have to get the technology that they're using. Say it's a better MRI machine. That's an expensive piece of equipment. They have to have specialized individuals to be able to run that equipment. So obviously you're going to have to pay these people, bring in new staff, probably pay them more than your average because they're running technology that most people don't know how to run. So that affects, you know, when you're talking about budgets and finances. So when you have to do that, they have to figure out other ways to make that money back, kind of. So technology is definitely one. The population is aging. That's another big thing that we have going on, just to think about. So obviously with the older population, you've got more sickness, more pre-existing conditions, more heart disease, more diabetes, more osteoporosis, things like that, just that come along with age. You know, in Canada, something else I remember from the chapter, and this isn't coming off any sheet here, is that a lot of the people spend more money on their medications than they do on actual health care, you know, going to the doctor and things like that. So it's not a perfect system. What are some drawbacks of universal health care? Remember any of those?
You have to go to like certain places somewhere.
Yes, lack of choice. Also, get in line behind the other 30 people who need their wisdom teeth taken out. That's, you know, you have certain providers and speed is not an option really. Whereas here, you know, non-universal type healthcare, you can actually get things done quicker. You have some choice. Now, sometimes you will pay more if you have insurance and you go out of your provider network, you're going to pay more. They're not going to cover that physician. It's just the part of the kind of ugly side of insurance and how they feed physicians under the table. Basically, we'll send you people, you know, they even have specific providers that they prefer in most cases. Talked about how, you know, another thing with technology is we're going to a lot of you know, like medical charting online. Information technology is being done electronically, and how that's a positive thing in the long run. That's the majority of kind of the gist of what chapter 8 was. Obviously, the questions will be more in depth than that, but those are some of the main topics that we talked about that I want you to remember from chapter 8. Then we got to chapter 9, which was talking about staffing services. That's, you know, human resources, hiring, firing, equal employment opportunity, things like that. So let me see. In this chapter, we talked about probation. What is probation when you're starting a job? Yeah, it's kind of like a trial period. We're hiring you, but you're on probation for 90 days. Once you hit that 90 days, you're full-time, off probation, harder to fire, basically. Probation period, and I'm going over this because I'm not sure how much we talked about it in class, but you need to know that most places have a probationary period. If you are hiring one day, you should probably implement, if it's not there, a probationary period, because what that does is give you, like, say 90 days is a pretty stock probationary period. I think it's enough time to tell whether somebody's going to do a good job or not. And during that probationary period, you don't really owe them anything. They owe you a good job, and if you don't see that, then you can let them go without really them having a leg to stand on to come back. And now, if it's totally unjust, you don't want to do that. But it gives you a time to see, before you really lock them in and give too much effort on the administrative end of training, sending them to conferences, things like that. You don't want to. So hold off on some of that stuff until after the probationary period is up. Then that also gives you a chance at the end of that time to talk with the individual and say, all right, you're coming off probation. This is what I saw during the time. This is what you did well. This is what I want you to improve on, but I'm going to take you off probation. You're now clear. It gives you a good talking point, basically. Performance appraisal. What do we do that for? What's the reason for a performance appraisal? A lot of times that is factored in for sure. You have to have a certain rating on your performance appraisal to even be looked at for raises a lot of times. Long story short, it gives you a sit-down time with each individual employee to talk about expectations. Expectations happen beforehand. You tell them what you expect them to do, timelines, things like that. These are the things that I'm going to evaluate on. And then after a specified time period, usually it's either 6 months or a year, you do performance appraisals with your employees. You tell them how they did on each part. And it's usually, say a 5-point scale from poor to excellent, or satisfactory, being right there in the middle, something like that. And it could even be set up on a point scale where, you get 4 points for this. If you do well, 4 points for it. If you don't do well, you get 2. If you have a total of over 16 points, there's some sort of good benefit that's given. It's your way to talk to them about exactly what the things that you should have laid out to them clearly that are expected. This is what I'm going to judge you based on. Talk to them, tell them this is what you did well, this is what you can improve on, this is my findings, and both of you will sign it. If you do performance appraisals and they do not have any meaning, if it doesn't have any bearing on promotion, if it doesn't have anything to do with raises, what's the point of doing job appraisal really? If the person who has a perfect job appraisal doesn't get any benefit on top of someone who had the bare minimum, what is that going to do for morale for the people who are doing everything that is expected of them? It's going down. I'm not talking good about myself, but I've been there, done that. I've been in a situation where I kind of overachieved. I worked hard, and what it earned me was, because I did a good job on running an event, I get the next event too, and everybody else gets to sit back and watch me because my boss knew that I was going to do a good job. So before long, you start like, well, maybe I should screw this one up because I don't want every event. Orientation is something that you do early in the hiring process, obviously. That's where you introduce them to the mission of the organization. You introduce them to the rules of the organization, all of the different facilities that are there. You take them on a tour. You give them, like, they may get CPR and first aid training during orientation, things like that. That's something that happens up front. You're giving them training for the job. We also talked about discipline and how it's progressive. What would you generally start with in a disciplinary situation? Just say someone is being late for work. Yeah, basically you're just going to have a talk with them. Say, hey, I noticed you've been late several times lately. Let's see if we can get better on that, okay? Where do we go next? Then you're going to document. Then you're going to go to a written form where you call them in. You may even have another staff sit in, another administrative type staff to be present. You actually bring them in, have a written reprimand, basically, that's going to go in their file. You sign it, they sign it. They are basically saying, okay, yes, this is true. Here it goes. From there, it becomes progressively worse. Just know that there's progressive discipline that starts with basically just a verbal warning, nothing in the chart, nothing like that, and it progresses all the way down to potential, suspensions, firings, things like that. Okay, when you're filling jobs, one way that you might fill is through internal recruiting. What is that? Right, from someone who is already working at the facility. What's a positive of that?
It gives like the option to where you're not just working the same job. You can gain things from different jobs.
It's kind of right. It's motivating to the staff if they see people moving up from within, then it's going to motivate you to do a good job because you see there's potential to move up the ladder. As a leader or administrator, you're also saving money because you're not having to do the recruitment process externally. It usually takes less time. The person that you may bring in is already familiar with the mission and the goals and the department. And if you feel like they're ready to move up, then they pretty much know what they're going to need to do for that job. Yes, there will be some training, but not as much as if you brought someone in off the street. So remember that internal recruiting is a possibility. We talked about interviewing and then how interviews need to be, they need to, what's something that stands out about interviews? Anybody think of anything important when you're doing interviews? Anything? That's a good thing at the start. A good way to have a good indicator of how your interviews go is to have a kind of like a checklist or a list of questions that are going to go to everybody. Yet you can individualize certain things with interviews. Generally, you start out with a little bit of chit chat, small talk to get people calmed down. You don't want to have them sit down, they're nervous already. They sit down and you just say, all right, what would you do if, what's a time in your life where you had a conflict resolution situation? And they're like, already nervous, you want to put them at ease up front. Ask them about their family. Ask them if they've been fishing lately, if it's somebody that has told you they like, I mean, you know, whatever you can do to kind of get them calm, because then you're going to get a better view of what that person is really like. If you just jump straight into questions, you're almost not being fair to them. Also, now you need to have some specific questions that you're going to ask everybody so you can compare answers. A lot of times hiring is done by hiring committees, and I like that. And I think that's the way that it should be done, because then you have multiple people able to brainstorm and chime in and talk about how they feel different people would fit, better than one person making a decision. It's kind of like I prefer, you know, I was watching a thing last night. In South Africa, the court system, they don't have a jury. They just have a judge. And I'm sure that's in a lot of places. But I was watching a story on Oscar Pistorius. You guys remember him, the runner with the blades that killed his girlfriend? I was watching that story and went through this whole big trial, and it came down to this one little woman sitting up there to seal his fate. No peers, no, you know, I don't know. It's just, that's why, an example of why I like to have a committee for interviews. I think it's a good idea. When you're doing external recruiting, when you have a job opening, you're going to use things like social media, print materials, word of mouth, things like that. Those things can cost money. Some forms are more effective than others. Okay, you may see more people if you did, like, say, if you went to a job fair and you set up a table and you saw 100 people and you got to hand out pamphlets to people or applications even, but you're not going to get to really talk to anybody. You would be better served to take a day if you had 3 or 4 people that were interested to go meet them for lunch and give them the information. So specific targeted recruitment is probably better than just spreading the wealth and throwing applications up in the air and wherever they land, people can pick them up. Just saying, if you're looking for, if you have people that you want to target, that's the best way to go about it. Okay. Talked about things like errors that are made when doing performance appraisals and interviews. There's, like, do you remember when we talked about an accept error? That's where that's a selection of a candidate who performs poorly on the job. A reject error is rejecting a candidate who would have later been successful. In either situation, the outcome is costly because you've lost time, and recruiting and screening are time consuming and expensive. It's just something to think about, and that's just part of experience and learning process. Let's move on. 10 was about volunteer and intern management. What's a positive of having a program where you accept volunteers and interns?
You can kind of share a lot of the, not necessarily load of people, loads of the work, but it just kind of spreads it out more evenly, so one person's not over.
Yes, they can actually help with the tasks at hand, for sure. What's a stress that may be caused by having interns and volunteers?
There are certain situations they might not be able to handle as well as somebody who's trying that experience.
They may not be able to handle everything. They may not, what do you have to do with them up front when they come in?
Explain like what they're doing.
Yeah, you gotta spend time training them and telling them what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, what they can do, what they can't do. When someone is spending the time to train them, that's cutting down on what they were, what would they be doing otherwise? What are they doing? They're training volunteers and interns when normally they would be running the hippotherapy program, or something like that. So you have to trade off a little bit of upfront work to get them ready and started. But I think overall it's great to have fresh faces, practicums, interns in there, because usually your clientele in a recreation therapy setting especially enjoys seeing new people. Sometimes interns come in and give you some of the best ideas to try because they're fresh and they haven't seen as much, and they have things that they want to try that they've thought about because they heard about it in class or something. So I think it's a very positive thing, but it does take a little bit of work to make it happen. So you got to make sure that your agency is ready to handle internships, train them. Are you going to figure out things such as, what sort of benefits are you going to give them? If you're going to have volunteers and interns, should you pay them? Depends on the situation. Can you pay them? Is it in your budget where you could pay them? If you can't pay them, there's other ways that you can compensate. What are some other ways you can compensate them? Food, place to live, things like that. A lot of places, like NMRC, they've got a cafeteria. If they let you eat meals there every time, and they also have a couple hotel rooms in one of the things. We've had interns that lived on campus and ate in the cafeteria before. That's a pretty good deal. If you think about it, if you're having to travel to do an internship and you're not having to figure out lodging, and you're saving a lot of money on your food, you may not be getting a check, but it's lessening your load financially because you're getting those things. So it's not just paid internships that can be positive, if there's other things that you can offer. When you're going to have volunteers and internships, it's your responsibility as a supervisor, manager, to make sure that the people that you're bringing in are good people. It's really a good idea, and most places do this, to do an actual background check. Gosh, they do background checks for you to work with Special Olympics. Of course, you're working with vulnerable individuals in that situation, so you can see why that would be the case. But even not just your employees, your volunteers, your interns reflect on you as a manager and reflect on your facility as a whole. Because, if you're running an event and someone from the public comes to be a part of some event that you're running, they won't know whether the person is an intern or a volunteer. They'll see them as just one of your staff. So you want to make sure that you get good ones because they reflect on you and they reflect on your facility. Slide 4 on that in chapter 10 goes through the selection and orientation of volunteers and interns. It has a lot of good information. You select candidates from the applicant pool. You put out that you are going to accept interns, or have a spot on your website that says that you accept interns. Or you have students reach out to you and ask you if you accept interns. That can happen sometimes too, as evidenced in this class, and I appreciate y'all. And I went in and added a lot of the facilities that you guys found that have CTRSs to our list. So for you guys who are looking to do the CTRS internship, come to me and I'll give you the full list and you can try to make some phone calls and choices. So good potential spots now. And I'm gonna do this next time I have the class too, you know. I'm gonna try to get as many places, and that way I'm not making all the calls. Some of the students are actually making the contacts, things like that. And then if it's by where you guys are interested in, then we're gonna have a wide variety of locations too, because I don't think there's anything wrong with internships where you have to travel a little bit. I think that's a good thing. If it's a situation that you can handle, I think it's nice to go do an internship somewhere you would like to visit. But that's slide 4. You select from the pool, then you interview candidates. Once at that point, you can place the ones that you select. You orient them to the work task, the agency, and the other professionals. You know, you're taking them around, showing them everything that's there, introducing them to who they're going to be working with. Because interns, especially, you know, you're talking people that are going to be with you for 400 to 560 hours. You know, that's a long time. It's basically like having another employee. So you need to take the time to make sure that they are forming relationships with the other employees, because they're going to basically be like one for the next 10 weeks or so. You know, and that's how it should be. Really, once they're trained, this is a trial run to see whether this is what they want to do. You know, so they need to be treated like employees as much as possible. Find out what training needs they need, review the supervisory and evaluation procedures, and complete any contracts and agreement forms. That's a good one to be familiar with. All right, I'm going to go ahead on to 11. It was about communicating effectively in the workplace. As far as communication, we talked about how there's personal and interpersonal communication. There's managerial and professional communication. Different. What is one of the most, really the greatest impact of communication? What does it come from? Well, that was very well put. What's something very important when you're communicating with something? What's something that people look at? There you go. Basically, your nonverbal communication says way more than the verbal most of the time. You know, you can tell a lot when you're talking to somebody by nonverbal communication. When you are going to communicate in the workplace, what's an advantage of written communication? Absolutely. It's really not, if it's written in a clear way, there is no wiggle room for misunderstanding. They can't say, well, you didn't tell me that. You can say, yes, I did. You know, it was in the email I sent you, and you sent the red receipt that you got it. You know, written communication puts a trail of, you know, trackable communication that you can go back and look at. Especially good for training situations. Kind of similar to having people, if you do an in-service training about I used to, when I was at the regional center, I was a people mover driver trainer. Which is our big golf carts that we have out there. They have seats running down the whole side, and the clients love to go on rides on the people movers. But there are all sorts of rules, like you're not supposed to drive over a certain speed. You shouldn't go into the parking lots. You only go this direction during a certain part of the day. These are trouble spots. You need to use this mirror that's mounted up here to make sure clients aren't coming across. There's just pre-trip inspection before you load a bunch of clients on. You need to make sure that there's no fluid leaks. When you put them on, you need to do seat belts. You go through all this stuff with them. You let them go on a driving test. And then at the end, you make them sign a piece of paper saying that they have completed this training, that they acknowledge all of the things that were gone over that day. And the reason that that's done is then when they go out the next week and don't put seat belts on the clients and turn a curve going fast and fling one of them off, it's not going to come back to me and them saying, he didn't tell me they had to wear seat belts. And I'll be like, well, you signed the paper that said that you acknowledge that, and you put your initials by that on the sheet. You know, so written things are a good thing as far as communication. Know what delegation is? When you're doing that, you need to make sure that what you're delegating to someone is within their assigned duties. You don't want to just pull something out of the air and delegate it because you don't want to do it. Make sure that what you're delegating, that the employee has the competence to do it. Also give a clear expectation of what you expect them to do, you know, clearly defined. At that point, the employee will accept authority and responsibility, and then the manager will just monitor because you have delegated that. And like I said, delegating was something that was hard for me and still is hard for me. Not one of my favorite things to do. It's just a personality thing. I'm more of a jump in there with you and, hey, let's go do this, or hey, you want to help me do this? And then people will come along and they don't feel like you're just telling them what to do. It's just a personality situation. There were slide number 6 in chapter 11 has some variables that impact communication. Things like semantics, professional jargon, generational differences, physical factors, emotional concerns. Those are just things that can influence and impact the way communication happens between people in the workplace. In this chapter, we also talked about negotiation and how that works. How when we have collaboration, we want a win-win situation. We talked about the importance of team building. We all know that that's a positive. When you move into these roles, as you move forward, I want you to take that with you and remember the importance of team building, because I've been in places that did it, and I've been in places that did not. And team building takes away from the things that you would normally be doing during, say, that afternoon that you're doing a team building activity. However, you more than make up with that by the fact that your staff have a chance to bond, which makes them work better, which makes them more efficient as a team. So it's worth taking a little time to set aside some time for team building. And it doesn't have to be anything formal. Like I say, we did karaoke. I ran a team building thing, and I put together a scavenger hunt and broke up all of us into different groups. And it was super fun. People were sprinting all over the building and driving around town trying to find things. Had absolutely nothing to do with work. But everybody had fun. and I gave prizes at the end, and then they, ribbed each other for the next 2 weeks about who won. So did it help the overall feel in our department? Yes. Was it worth it? Yes. Remember, as a manager, that you're the one, especially a first line manager, you're the one that's going to take the hits from the public. You're the one, when Karen says, I want to see the manager, you're the one that's probably going to be seen first. Because, if your staff that are performing activities, they're going to come to you. Now you're the intermediary between the complainant, your workers, and the upper level management. And that's part of being in that role, is being able to kind of mediate things in that situation. All right, chapter 12, a motivating work environment. Obviously, we want that to be the case. How motivating your work environment is a direct indicator of how the amount and quality of work that's going to be put out. Let me go back to a different thing. Do you guys remember how billing is done for recreation therapy? What are the increments usually used for billing? How many minutes? 15. It's usually in 15-minute increments for billing for recreation therapy. Don't know why that jumped into my mind. It just did. I want 2 examples of intrinsic motivation as a recreation therapy professional. You're helping other people get better, and that makes you feel better about yourself. Okay? Anybody else have something? One more. I know that's the main one that she just stole the easy one. It could be forming relationships with coworkers that you don't really know. So you're getting more friends. Might be an intrinsic goal for you. So that's an intrinsic motivator. So yes, we'll go with that. Extrinsic motivators. Money. Man, she's taking these easy ones, y'all. Got it. Promotions. Money, promotions. If you attend this 3-hour seminar on Friday, it is not mandatory, but if you do, you can get 3 CEUs to go towards your yearly count. That's an extrinsic motivator. That's something external that is tangible that you can use. So intrinsic are things that you feel inside. Extrinsic are things like CEUs, raises, promotions. Now, you'll have to use your book. I'm going to go ahead and tell you. Chapter 12, you will have to use your book for this test, because it's going to ask you things about like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which you've all seen that triangle 100 times. It's going to ask you about, I'm trying to remember who's exactly, McGregor's theory X and theory Y. We talked about those and how X basically says staff desire direction. They want you to tell them what to do. Y, the manager assumes people like to work and have self-control to commit to work. So it's a bunch of different theories in this chapter, talking about how different people think that motivation takes place for their workers. Vroom's expectancy theory. There's a bunch of different theories in here. I'm just going to tell you, we're not going to go over them all right now. We've gone through them once, and you can go through. You will retain more by actually looking for the answers and reading each one of these again for this test. These should not be really hard. You should be able to find these answers about this. When you are trying to create a motivating work environment, the manager's challenge is to engage staff in experiences that actually are fulfilling to them and give them a sense of fulfillment. They get that intrinsic motivation. The manager creates a work environment that's supportive of personal satisfaction and achievement of not just personal goals, but the unit goals, like your entire recreation therapy department, let's say, is achieving goals. And that's going to be motivating, because when you're successful, you want to be successful again, and you want to get better. Slide number 9 on this chapter has intrinsic and extrinsic motivators on it. Good little slide. Some challenges to motivational work sites. Some of these I've seen, and these are kind of real world examples. Increased productivity with decreased resources. That happens. I've had my resources decreased that I was working with, and they still want you to put out the same amount of work or better work with less resources. That's a challenge. It's hard to motivate employees when you're giving them less to work with and expect them to do the same amount or more. So that's just a challenge. The workforce is becoming globally and generationally diverse. So it takes different forms of motivation for a 20-year-old and a 60-year-old, a male, a female, someone who's single, someone who's married with kids. Different things are going to motivate all these different people, different nationalities. You know, something that may extremely motivate you may not motivate someone else at all. So that's a challenge as a manager, as an administrator, to find out what's motivating to your employees and to use those things to help them want to, you know, do the best they can. Those are the main things from those chapters that I just wanted to go over. A lot of the stuff we talked about today isn't going to be directly on this test, but it's things that I want you to take from these chapters. Just take a little more time today and talk about it. Some of the things will be on the test, and I hope some of the things I said will kind of jog your memory. On this test, do not overthink. Don't go in. I mean, I saw it on the first one. Some of y'all had every one of the answers marked, and then some of them scratched out, and then you finally picked one. And one of them was, you know, you had the right one marked at one point. Some of these that are gonna, now don't underthink and just go through and mark. Most of these things you can find in the book. Like I say, this one is going to be, there's some tricky ones. It's the same type questions. It's the same format questions, but it's easier. Some of them are gimmies to me. I truly think that. And if y'all disagree, y'all can tell me that after the test. So let me stop this recording.